Good evening and welcome. Settle in and let the quiet of history wash over you. Tonight, we drift back to a time of monumental change, a world forged by fire and ambition, a world that we still feel the echoes of today. We are going to explore the life of one of the most consequential figures in medieval history, a man known as William the Conqueror. His name alone conjures images of a fearsome warrior, a stern leader who forever changed the course of England. But his story is more complex, more human, and ultimately more compelling than the simple title suggests. As the candle flickers and the world outside grows still, we will journey through the landscapes of the 11th century. We begin in the verdant, rolling hills of Normandy, a duchy on the northern coast of what is now France. This is not the England he would later rule, but the cradle of his turbulent youth. Here he is not yet the conqueror, but simply William, the illegitimate son of a powerful duke. His birthright is not secure. It is a precarious gift, one that will be challenged, tested, and nearly taken from him time and again. We will walk with him through his childhood, a time marked by danger and instability, a period where his very life hangs in the balance. We will see how a young boy, bereft of his father, is forced to mature far too quickly, surrounded by nobles who see him not as their future duke, but as an obstacle to be removed. Our journey will take us to the heart of Norman culture, a society built on a foundation of military prowess, fervent religious belief, and a keen sense of order. We will explore the unique Norman identity, a blend of Viking heritage and Frankish customs, which will shape William's character and his ultimate destiny. We will witness how he, against all odds, solidifies his grip on power, mastering the art of war and diplomacy. This is the period of his life where the legend begins to take root, where a vulnerable boy transforms into a formidable ruler. We will see how his ambition, fueled by a deep-seated need for legitimacy and control, begins to extend beyond the borders of his duchy. From the tranquil halls of his Norman court, our narrative will inevitably lead us across the narrow, yet historically significant English Channel. It is here that we encounter the political tapestry of Anglo-Saxon England, a kingdom that, at the turn of the millennium, is both powerful and deeply divided. The stage is set for a dramatic confrontation, a clash of cultures and claims to the throne. We will delve into the intricate web of succession, a tangle of promises, oaths, and betrayals that sets the scene for one of the most famous invasions in history. The year 1066 looms large in our story, a date etched into the memory of generations. It is the year of the Battle of Hastings, a conflict that will decide the fate of a nation. We will follow William's preparations, the gathering of his vast army, the tense crossing of the Channel, and the brutal, bloody struggle on a hill now known as Battle. We will walk through the field with him, understanding the strategic genius and sheer determination that secured his victory. This is not a dramatic battle scene. Instead, we will explore the quiet weight of history on that day, the decisions made, and the incredible stakes. But the conquest is not a single battle. After Hastings, William faces the daunting task of subduing and unifying a proud and rebellious people. The conquest is a long and arduous process, punctuated by revolts and acts of brutal suppression. We will explore how William establishes his new order, a blend of Norman authority and existing Anglo-Saxon traditions. We will witness the construction of the iconic Motte and Bailey castles, symbols of Norman power that dot the English landscape to this day. This is the period of consolidation, where William transforms from a conqueror to a king, a sovereign ruling over a new realm. Finally, we will examine his legacy. We will see how his reign fundamentally reshaped England, influencing its language, its laws, its architecture, and its very social fabric. The Domesday Book, a monumental survey of his new kingdom, stands as a testament to his administrative genius. We will understand the profound and lasting impact of his rule, an impact that extends to the very foundations of the English monarchy and the legal system. So, as you find a comfortable place, let yourself be carried back to this distant time. Let the life of William the Conqueror, a boy who became a duke and then a king, unfold before you. This is a story of ambition, power, and the forging of a new world, a world that is now part of our shared heritage. Let us now journey back to the very beginning of our story, to the year 1028 and a castle in the small town of Falaise in Normandy. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp stone, a world where life is both grand and brutally simple. This is where a boy named William is born, but his birth is marked by an immediate and profound social stain. He is illegitimate. His father is Robert I, the powerful and charismatic Duke of Normandy. His mother is not the Duke's wife, but rather a woman of humble origins named Herliva. She is the daughter of a tanner, a man who worked with hides, a trade that, while necessary, was considered beneath the nobility. This union, born of affection but not sanctioned by the church, earns the young boy a lifelong and damning epithet, William the Bastard. This illegitimacy is not just a social inconvenience, it is a political vulnerability. While his father, Duke Robert, acknowledges him and seems to genuinely love him, the nobles of Normandy view the boy with deep suspicion and open contempt. In their eyes, he is a stain on the ducal line, a potential source of instability. They are powerful men, lords who control vast lands and command their own knights, and they believe the ducal succession should pass through a legitimate heir, someone of pure noble blood. They whisper behind closed doors, questioning the boy's right to rule, and their resentment festers. Duke Robert, a man known for his fiery temperament and his deep piety, understands the danger his son faces. He knows that his own sudden death would plunge the duchy into chaos, with the nobles fighting over who would succeed him. So, in the year 1035, before embarking on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, a journey from which he will never return, he takes a momentous step. He gathers his great men, his most influential vassals, and forces them to swear an oath of fealty to William as his heir. He presents the 7-year-old boy to them, a small, quiet figure who must have seemed woefully unprepared to lead such a formidable group of men. These nobles, bound by their oath, grudgingly accept the boy, but their loyalty is thin and transactional. It is a promise made under duress, and it will not last. When news arrives of Duke Robert's death in Nicaea, the fragile peace shatters. A power vacuum opens, and the nobles who swore an oath to William begin to act on their ambitions. For the next decade, Normandy is a land of constant upheaval and violence. The young duke is a pawn in a deadly game. His protectors are killed, his advisors are assassinated, and his childhood is a terrifying succession of narrow escapes. He lives a nomadic existence, moved from one castle to another for his own safety. At one point, his tutor is murdered right in front of him. We can only imagine the terror and isolation of a young boy, surrounded by men who are supposed to protect him, but are themselves caught in a whirlpool of treachery and self-interest. This harsh reality, however, forges a remarkable character. It teaches William to be wary, to trust few people, and to rely on his own judgment. It instills in him a fierce ambition and a ruthless determination to not just survive, but to command. The boy who was once a vulnerable ward becomes a keen observer of human nature. He watches the feuds, the betrayals, and the shifting alliances, learning the brutal rules of medieval politics. He learns to wield power not just through strength, but through a calculated understanding of his opponent's weaknesses. The landscape of Normandy itself becomes a character in this story. The Norman castles, built of wood and earth in the Motte and Bailey style, were not simply residences, they were centers of power, symbols of authority. A motte was a large earth mound, often artificial, topped with a wooden tower or keep. The bailey was a courtyard enclosed by a defensive ditch and palisade at the base of the motte. These structures were both a constant reminder of a lord's power and a refuge from the chaos of the time. We can picture the young William, perhaps, looking down from one of these wooden keeps, watching the chaos unfold below, understanding that his future, his very existence, depended on his ability to master this violent world. By the time he reaches his late teens, William is no longer just the bastard. He is a young man, tall and powerfully built, with a burgeoning reputation for his courage and military skill. He is a man who knows what it is to be hunted, and he is now determined to be the hunter. He begins to assert his authority with a chilling efficiency. He rides out with his own growing company of knights, putting down rebellions with a swift and often brutal hand. He makes a crucial alliance with King Henry I of France, who recognizes that a stable Normandy under a strong duke would serve as a valuable buffer state. This alliance proves to be a turning point. In 1047, William faces his most significant challenge yet at the Battle of Valledunes. A large coalition of rebellious Norman barons, supported by a count from neighboring Anjou, gathers to overthrow him once and for all. It is a desperate and close-fought battle. William fights alongside King Henry III's forces, and together they manage to rout the rebel army. The victory is a watershed moment. It proves William's military genius and his legitimacy as Duke in a way that no oath ever could. He has earned his place through the crucible of combat. As the dust settles, William's rule over Normandy is no longer a fragile, contested claim. It is a reality forged in blood. He begins to establish a firm and centralized control over his duchy, rewarding loyal supporters and punishing rebels with a swift and unforgiving hand. The turbulent period of his youth is over, but the lessons learned during those dark years, the need for absolute loyalty, the importance of military strength, and the chilling effectiveness of ruthlessness, will stay with him for the rest of his life. The boy who was once called the Bastard is now simply William, Duke of Normandy, a formidable figure in his own right, ready to cast his gaze beyond the borders of his small duchy. With his rule now secure in Normandy, William begins to look outward, to the complex and often treacherous world of medieval European politics. He is no longer simply a survivor. He is a shrewd and ambitious leader, ready to expand his influence. His court at Rouen becomes a center of power, attracting ambitious knights and scholars alike. We can imagine the scene, the great hall of the castle, filled with the murmur of Norman French, the clinking of goblets, and the quiet discussions of strategy and alliance. The young man who had once been hunted now commands respect and loyalty. He has mastered the art of governance, establishing a firm administrative structure and enforcing the law with an iron hand. He builds churches and monasteries, not just out of piety, but also to project his authority and secure the blessing of the church. His reputation grows, spreading across the Channel to the island of England. Across the water, England is ruled by a very different kind of king. This is Edward the Confessor, a deeply pious and peace-loving monarch who has no heir. Edward has spent a significant portion of his life in exile in Normandy, and during this time he developed a deep affection for the region and a close relationship with its rulers, including William's father. This historical tie, a kind of shared heritage between the English and Norman courts, is a key element in our story. As King Edward grows older, the question of who will succeed him becomes a matter of intense political drama. The English nobility, centered around the powerful and ambitious Godwin family, led by Earl Godwin and later his son, Harold Godwinson, have their own designs on the throne. They represent the established Anglo-Saxon power structure. William, however, believes he has a strong claim, and he builds his case on a series of events and agreements. Sometime in the early 1050s, Edward the Confessor, without an heir of his own, is believed to have promised the English throne to his Norman cousin, William. This promise, though never fully documented in a way we would recognize today, is a pivotal moment. For William, this is the legitimizing factor he has always craved. He is no longer just the bastard duke, he is the designated heir to a kingdom. He has, in his mind, been chosen by God and by his royal cousin. The Norman chronicle of events takes on a new layer of complexity around the year 1064. An English earl, Harold Godwinson, is shipwrecked on the coast of Normandy. William receives him with great hospitality, but Harold soon finds himself in a precarious position. The Norman sources, particularly the famous Bayeux Tapestry, depict Harold swearing a solemn oath to William, promising to support his claim to the English throne. The tapestry shows Harold, his hands on two reliquaries, holy relics, making this pledge in front of William. For a medieval man, an oath sworn on holy relics was a binding, sacred covenant. It was a promise to God himself. The exact nature of the oath is debated by historians, but for William it is clear. Harold has publicly and irrevocably committed himself to William's cause. He now has not only the promise of the king, but the sworn word of the most powerful noblemen in England. Meanwhile, back in England, political tensions are reaching a breaking point. Edward the Confessor dies in January of 1066. On his deathbed, he is said to have commended his kingdom to Harold. The Anglo-Saxon Wettin, or Council of Nobles, immediately elects Harold Godwinson as king. He is crowned almost instantly, an act that sends shockwaves across the channel. For William, this is not just a political setback. It is a personal betrayal, a violation of a sacred oath. The news of Harold's coronation reaches William while he is hunting. The Norman accounts describe his reaction as a mix of fury and deep contemplation. He is now faced with a choice: to accept Harold's rule and let his claim wither, or to fight for what he believes is rightfully his. William chooses war. He begins to assemble a fleet and an army. This is an undertaking of monumental scale. The logistical challenges are immense, gathering hundreds of ships, recruiting thousands of soldiers and knights from across Normandy and beyond, and amassing the supplies needed for a full-scale invasion. William's preparations are meticulous. He promises land and riches to those who will fight for him, attracting a diverse army of adventurers, professional soldiers, and men seeking their fortunes. His court becomes a hive of activity, with shipbuilders working day and night and armorers forging weapons. The anticipation and anxiety of this moment hang heavy in the air. The English Channel, so narrow yet so daunting, separates two worlds. England, now under King Harold II, prepares for a different kind of war. Harold knows an invasion is coming, but he does not know from where. His kingdom faces a threat from the north, from the formidable Viking king Harald Hardrada of Norway, who also has a claim to the throne. Harold Godwinson must guard his shores on two fronts, a perilous and ultimately fatal position. As summer turns to autumn in 1066, the stage is set for a dramatic and world-changing confrontation. William's preparations are complete, his army is ready, but a strange twist of fate delays his crossing. The winds are unfavorable, holding his massive fleet in the Norman harbor of St. Valery-sur-Somme. It is a time of immense tension, and William's men begin to grow restless. They question whether this is a sign from God. Yet, in this delay lies a peculiar advantage. The Viking invasion of England begins in the north, drawing Harold's army away from the south. The winds finally change, and William's fleet sets sail for England, an invasion force poised to rewrite the history of an entire nation. The great ships, with their carved prows and billowing sails, cut through the dark waters, carrying a new destiny to England's shores. The year 1066 is a year of unparalleled drama and bloodshed for England. It is a time when the fate of a kingdom hangs in a precarious balance, decided not once, but 3 times by the sword. As we left our story, William the Conqueror, his fleet finally blessed with a favorable wind, is making his way across the English Channel. His invasion force lands at Pevensey Bay on the south coast of England on September 28th, a quiet, almost uneventful landing. The Norman soldiers and knights disembark, and instead of being met by an opposing army, they find an undefended shoreline. The first thing they do is not to fight, but to build a defensive fort, a Motte and Bailey castle, to secure their beachhead. It is a testament to William's strategic mind, always thinking about consolidation, about establishing a permanent presence. But where is King Harold Godwinson? As William's forces were gathering in Normandy, a formidable Viking fleet under the command of Harald Hardrada had invaded the north of England. Hardrada, a legendary warrior king, believed he too had a claim to the English throne. Harold, a man of incredible energy and military acumen, had been forced to march his army, a large force of Anglo-Saxon fyrd, a kind of militia, and professional housecarls, a great distance north to confront this threat. He met and decisively defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th, a mere 3 days before William's landing. The victory was total, but the cost was immense. Harold's army was exhausted, depleted, and far from the south coast. When news of William's landing reaches him, Harold must make a decision that will define his legacy. He could have rested his troops, gathered reinforcements, and prepared for a more strategic confrontation. Instead, in a testament to his pride and his determination to defend his kingdom, he turns his weary army around and marches them south at a furious pace. It is a staggering feat, covering over 200 miles in just a few days. The men are tired, and they are not at full strength, but they are driven by loyalty to their king and a fierce desire to protect their homeland from a foreign invader. Harold positions his army on a steep, well-defended hill near a place now known as Battle. They form a shield wall, a classic Anglo-Saxon defensive formation where men stand shoulder to shoulder, their shields interlocking to create an impenetrable wall of wood and iron. It is an excellent position, difficult for a cavalry charge to break. William arrives with his Norman army, a force composed of armored knights on horseback, archers, and foot soldiers. The battle that follows on October 14th is a long, brutal affair that will last for most of the day. The Battle of Hastings, as it would come to be known, begins with the Norman archers firing volleys of arrows into the shield wall. The arrows, however, are largely ineffective against the tightly packed formation of shields. The Normans then send in their infantry and knights in a series of direct frontal assaults. Each time, they are met by the unyielding Anglo-Saxon shield wall, which holds firm. The battle becomes a grinding, bloody stalemate. At one point, a rumor spreads that William has been killed, and a panic begins to set in among the Norman ranks. William, in a display of remarkable leadership, pulls off his helmet and rides among his men, shouting, "Look at me! I am alive, and with God's help, I will yet be victorious." This moment of charisma and courage steadies his forces and prevents a rout. The turning point of the battle is not a single act of bravery, but a clever stratagem. The Norman forces, perhaps accidentally or perhaps deliberately, stage a series of feigned retreats. The Anglo-Saxons, ever confident in their superior position, break their disciplined shield wall to chase the fleeing Norman foot soldiers. This is exactly what William's cavalry has been waiting for. The mounted knights turn and charge into the now exposed English ranks, cutting them down in a devastating charge. The shield wall, once the greatest strength of the Anglo-Saxon army, is now their greatest weakness. The fighting becomes a chaotic melee. The final moments of the battle are particularly dramatic. King Harold is still fighting, leading his men from the front. The Normans unleash another barrage of arrows, and according to the Bayeux Tapestry, one of these arrows strikes Harold in the eye, mortally wounding him. The shield wall finally collapses, and the remaining English forces are routed. Harold and his brothers are all killed, and their bodies are so mutilated that Harold's mistress is reportedly brought to the battlefield to identify his body. The victory is complete, but it is not the end of William's struggle. He is now the conqueror, but his new kingdom is far from unified. He has won a battle, but he has not yet won the peace. The victory at Hastings has decapitated the Anglo-Saxon government, but it has not broken the spirit of the English people. They still see Harold as their rightful king, and they do not view William, the foreign duke, as their legitimate ruler. The road ahead is long and arduous, filled with resistance and rebellion, but the crucial first step has been taken. The future of England now lies in the hands of the Norman victor. The sun sets on the battlefield, casting long shadows over the dead, and a new era for England has begun. The victory at Hastings was decisive, but it was not the end of the conquest. William the Conqueror now faced the daunting task of subduing and securing a vast, hostile kingdom. The weeks and months following the battle were not a victory parade, but a period of methodical and at times brutal consolidation. His initial approach was cautious. After the battle, William did not march directly on London. Instead, he led his army on a sweeping path through the southeast of England, sacking towns and demonstrating his overwhelming military might. This was a clear message to the English nobles and their people. Resistance was futile. He systematically cut off London from its supply lines, making it clear that the city would either have to submit or starve. Meanwhile, in London, the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobility, led by the Witan, or Royal Council, met to decide their next move. With Harold Godwinson dead, they chose to elect Edgar Atheling, a young boy and the great-nephew of Edward the Confessor, as their new king. This was a final, defiant act of resistance, an attempt to maintain the traditional Anglo-Saxon line of succession. But Edgar was a king without an army, and the nobility that supported him was deeply divided. The situation was untenable. When William's forces finally reached the outskirts of London, the city's leaders and the young Edgar Atheling were forced to submit. In a quiet but incredibly symbolic moment, they offered the crown to William. On Christmas Day, 1066, a little over 2 months after Hastings, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. The coronation, however, was not the peaceful affair William had hoped for. As the ceremony took place, the Norman guards outside the abbey, mistaking the shouts of acclamation from inside for a riot, began to set fire to the surrounding buildings. The English in the crowd, fearing a massacre, fled. The scene was a chaotic foreshadowing of the years to come. William's new reign would be marked by constant rebellion and the need for ever more forceful pacification. He was a king, yes, but he was a foreign king, and his new subjects did not accept his rule willingly. William's strategy for maintaining control was twofold: a new political system and the construction of castles. He began by confiscating the lands of the English nobles who had fought against him at Hastings. These lands were then distributed to his Norman followers, rewarding their loyalty and creating a new Norman aristocracy. This was a radical redistribution of wealth and power, effectively dismantling the old Anglo-Saxon landowning class and replacing it with a new Norman elite. The Anglo-Saxon system of earls and thanes was replaced by a feudal system, a social and political hierarchy where the king granted land, fiefs, to his most important nobles, barons, in exchange for military service. These barons, in turn, would grant land to lesser knights, creating a pyramid of loyalty and obligation, all leading back to William. This new system was an ingenious way to keep his nobles loyal and to ensure a standing army was always at his disposal. The most visible symbols of this new Norman order were the castles. William initiated a massive castle-building program across England. These were not the stone fortresses we might picture today, but rather motte and bailey castles, quick to construct and incredibly effective at projecting power. A motte was a large earth mound, often artificial, topped with a wooden tower, or keep where the lord and his family would reside. A bailey was a walled courtyard at the base of the motte where the garrison, stables, and other buildings were located. These castles, strategically placed to control key towns, river crossings, and rebellious regions, were physical manifestations of Norman power. They were a constant, visible reminder that a Norman lord was in charge, and that any rebellion would be met with swift force. The Tower of London, originally a motte and bailey, is perhaps the most famous example of this policy, a stark symbol of foreign rule imposed on the heart of the kingdom. The most significant and brutal act of pacification was the harrying of the North in 1069 to 1070. Rebellions in the north of England, supported by the Danes and Scots, threatened to undermine William's entire authority. His response was devastating. He systematically laid waste to the countryside between York and Durham, burning crops, killing livestock, and destroying villages. The devastation was so complete that the region was left uninhabitable for years. The chronicler Orderic Vitalis described it as a place reduced to a desert. This was not an act of a conqueror merely securing his throne. It was an act of brutal suppression, a chilling message that resistance would be met with total destruction. The harrying of the North effectively crushed any future rebellions in the area and ensured that William's rule was no longer questioned. By the end of the 1070s, William had cemented his authority. The English resistance was broken, and a new Anglo-Norman society was beginning to take shape. The land was his, and the people, though resentful, were his subjects. He had transformed from an illegitimate duke to the unquestioned master of a new kingdom, a man whose will was absolute. As William's grip on England tightens, his focus shifts from warfare to administration. He is not merely a conqueror. He is a king determined to establish a lasting and legitimate dynasty. This new phase of his reign is characterized by a mix of ruthless pragmatism and a deep-seated desire to understand and control his new kingdom. The landscape of England, once an unfamiliar land of Anglo-Saxon customs and laws, is now his to shape. We can picture William, no longer on the battlefield, but in the quiet of his court, poring over maps and ledgers, seeking to master his dominion not with the sword, but with the pen. One of the most remarkable and enduring achievements of his reign is the creation of the Domesday Book. Begun in 1086, it is an astonishing document, a comprehensive survey of the entire Kingdom of England. William sent his commissioners, men who were not from the local area and were therefore less likely to be swayed by local allegiances, to every corner of England. Their task was to record, with meticulous detail, the land and resources of the kingdom. This was not a quick or easy process. the commissioners would gather local representatives and question them under oath about what was in their villages and who owned it. The book itself is a masterpiece of medieval bureaucracy. The name Domesday comes from the Old English word doom, or judgment, because its judgments on land ownership were considered final and unalterable, like the last judgment of God. The survey recorded everything. Who owned the land before the conquest? Who owned it now? How many peasants, or villeins, the Norman term for unfree peasants, there were? How many plows? How many mills? How many sheep? It even recorded the value of the land. The sheer scope of this undertaking is breathtaking. For a society without modern computers or sophisticated record-keeping, it was an unprecedented feat of organization. The purpose of the Domesday Book was multifaceted. First and foremost, it was a fiscal tool. William needed to know exactly what taxes he could collect from his kingdom. By knowing the value of all the land, he could ensure that his new tax system was both fair and profitable. Secondly, it was a political tool. The survey solidified his ownership of the land. Any Anglo-Saxon who had not been able to prove their ownership now saw their land officially designated as belonging to a new Norman lord, and ultimately to the king. It was the final legal seal on the conquest, making it very difficult for any of the Old English families to challenge the new order. The Domesday Book was, in effect, a declaration that every piece of land in England, every peasant, every cow, and every sheep now belonged to him. William also began the process of integrating his Norman customs and laws with the existing Anglo-Saxon traditions. The new legal system that emerged was a fascinating hybrid. For instance, the common law of England, which would later become the basis for legal systems around the world, had its roots in this period of synthesis. Norman courts and legal procedures were introduced, but many of the Anglo-Saxon customs and laws were also retained, albeit under Norman control. This gradual merging of legal traditions created a strong, centralized legal framework that was a far cry from the more fragmented legal systems of Anglo-Saxon England. The language of England also began to change. The Norman nobility and court spoke a dialect of French, which became the language of power and prestige. Latin was used for official documents and in the church. The Old English of the Anglo-Saxons, once the language of kings and poetry, was relegated to the language of the common people. Over the next few centuries, this linguistic clash would lead to a dramatic transformation, with Old English absorbing thousands of Norman French words and evolving into the Middle English that we would later recognize in the works of Chaucer. It is a slow, quiet transformation, but one that fundamentally reshapes the very words spoken on the streets and in the fields. As we drift further into William's later years, we see a king who is still a warrior, still a man of immense physical and mental strength, but also a man haunted by the violence of his past and the fragility of his future. He spends a great deal of his time in Normandy, and the relationship between England and Normandy becomes one of a single, shared realm ruled by one man. He faces rebellions from his own sons, particularly his eldest son, Robert Curthose, who feels he has been denied his rightful inheritance. The life of a king, even a conqueror, is never without its challenges, and William is not immune to the sorrows and betrayals of family. In 1087, while campaigning in France, William is fatally injured when his horse stumbles. He is taken back to Rouen, where he lies for several weeks, suffering in agony. On his deathbed, he is said to have expressed deep remorse for the brutal acts of his reign, particularly the harrying of the North. He orders the release of political prisoners and gives his blessing to his younger son, William Rufus, to inherit England, while his eldest, Robert, would get Normandy. He dies on September 9th, 1087, a conqueror to the end, but also a man who understood the weight of his actions. His funeral is marred by one final indignity. A fire breaks out in the church, and a man stands up and claims that the land where the church stands was illegally taken from him, demanding payment. The man who had conquered a kingdom had to have his own burial plot purchased for him. It is a fittingly chaotic and undignified end for a man who had brought so much chaos and order to his world. With William the Conqueror now in his final resting place, we turn to the enduring legacy of his life and reign. The world he left behind was irrevocably changed, a new society built upon the ruins of the old. The conquest was not just a change of leadership. It was a fundamental reshaping of England's social, political, and cultural landscape. The effects of his reign would ripple through the centuries, influencing everything from the monarchy to the language we speak today. Perhaps the most obvious and lasting impact of the conquest was the establishment of a new dynasty. William's Norman successors, his sons and their descendants, would rule England for nearly a century. The English monarchy became a powerful, centralized institution. The new Norman kings, unlike their Anglo-Saxon predecessors, were not elected by a council of nobles, but inherited their crowns based on a new, more formalized system of succession. This change laid the groundwork for the modern British monarchy, with its emphasis on dynastic legitimacy. The Tower of London, originally a symbol of Norman oppression, would become a permanent stone fortress, a royal palace, and a central symbol of monarchical power, standing to this day as a testament to William's reign. William's greatest administrative innovation, the Domesday Book, continued to serve as a vital record for centuries. It became the bedrock of England's feudal system, a reference point for land ownership and taxation. While it was created for William's immediate fiscal and political needs, its existence provided a detailed snapshot of late 11th century England, an invaluable resource for historians today. It tells us about the population, the economy, and the social structure of a kingdom on the cusp of a new era. It is a quiet but monumental testament to his organizational genius. The most profound yet gradual transformation was the one that took place in language. The Norman conquest brought with it Norman French, a language that became the tongue of the court, the administration, and the nobility. For nearly 300 years, English, or more accurately, Old English, was the language of the peasantry. This linguistic stratification had a lasting effect. Over time, the two languages began to merge, with Old English absorbing thousands of French words. We can see this legacy in the dual words we use today, the common Anglo-Saxon word for an animal in the field, like cow, sheep, or pig, and the more refined Norman French word for the meat that comes from it, beef, mutton, and pork. This linguistic synthesis created Middle English, the language of Chaucer, and ultimately the basis for modern English. The conquest also had a lasting impact on England's relationship with its neighbors. The fact that the King of England was also the Duke of Normandy created a powerful cross-channel empire. This new Norman English realm was far more engaged in European affairs than Anglo-Saxon England had been. It meant England was now inextricably linked to the politics of France and the wider continent, a relationship that would lead to centuries of conflict and alliance, from the 100 Years' War to the present day. Finally, William's legacy is woven into the physical fabric of the country. The iconic Motte and Bailey castles, originally built of wood and earth, were later rebuilt in stone by his successors. These stone fortresses, like Rochester Castle and Windsor Castle, became permanent symbols of Norman power and the enduring legacy of William's conquest. The great cathedrals and abbeys that were built during his and his successors' reigns, such as Durham Cathedral, were constructed in a new Romanesque style, a clear visual break from the Anglo-Saxon past. These grand buildings were not just places of worship, they were statements of power and piety. As we conclude our journey, we are left with a quiet reflection on the man himself. William the Conqueror was a complex figure, a man of immense piety and brutal violence, a strategic genius who was also haunted by the consequences of his actions. He was born a bastard and died a king, a journey marked by immense challenge and a steely will to succeed. He did not merely conquer England, he transformed it, leaving behind a legacy that is still visible in our language, our laws, our buildings, and our very sense of history. The tumultuous year of 1066 was not just a single battle, but the beginning of a new world. A world forged by the ambition and determination of one man. And so we leave him, a figure of myth and history, now a part of the quiet centuries, his story a gentle whisper in the long sleep of time.